In the last video, we added a border around these grid items so we could better see how they are laid out. If we go over to the CSS and remove this border, and back over to the browser, it becomes difficult to see the rows and columns. By default, there is no spacing between the columns and rows, but to fix this, we can use grid gaps. To add a grid gap between columns, we have grid column gap. This is also applied to the container. So let's go ahead and add grid column gap. The value is up to us, so let's begin with 10 pixels. And this will add a 10 pixel gap between each of the columns. As you may have guessed, there is also grid row gap 2. And we can add this also to the container. So grid row gap. And let's again set this to be 10 pixels. Refresh. And there's a 10 pixel gap between the rows and the columns now. Note how these gaps are only between the rows and columns, not around the edge. This solves one of the old problems we had when spacing out items using CSS methods such as margin, where the space will be all around the elements, even the surrounding edge by default. Also, there is a shorthand version too, called grid gap. So rather than having 2 lines of code here, we can remove these and instead just use grid gap. Just like when using margin and padding, we can set 2 values. The first one is for the rows, so 20 pixels, and then for the columns, 10 pixels. Then refresh. Or if we wanted one value to apply to both the rows and columns, we can just leave in one value such as 10 pixels, and then this leaves equal gaps all around. You can see how much we can control with just a few lines of CSS. This kind of layout without the grid would be a lot more complex and time consuming. This is it now for grid gaps. Next we'll look at how to repeat tracks and also set the min and max sizes.